Hello, my name is Pauline Clark and I'm a member of St Giles Church, Desborough. I wanted to share a passage of scripture with you that is often read in church at this time of year. It's Luke 24 verses 13 to 35 on the road to Emmaus. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it's the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us when he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" Then they got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. A very familiar passage to me, and I'm sure to us all. I've been thinking a great deal in these last few days about the disciples at the time of Jesus' death and resurrection. I began on Easter Saturday when I thought particularly about how the disciples would have been feeling on that first Easter Saturday. I read through all the events in the Bible of that first Holy Week and how attitudes and experiences changed from Palm Sunday to Good Friday. On Palm Sunday, Jesus was welcomed into Jerusalem as a king and worshipped as the Messiah. Feelings ran high, and Jesus was greeted with extravagant praise as he entered the city in triumph. Yet a few days later, he was betrayed, arrested, and put on trial, and all the disciples except Peter ran away. Were they afraid for their own lives? Were they devastated that Jesus' ministry was under threat of ending? Were they frustrated that the attitudes of the crowds could change so rapidly? And why? What had Jesus done? Maybe all these questions came into the minds of those disciples. They must have felt that everything was at an end. Jesus' mission had failed and that they were to be left alone. No wonder they ran away. They seemed to have forgotten that Jesus had spoken with them on several occasions about his death. Had they forgotten, or had they failed to understand fully? Whatever the reason, they were alone and frightened and wondering what would happen next. In this passage, we can see that these two disciples were feeling the same. Their faces were downcast, and they seemed quite indignant that this stranger didn't seem to know anything about the events of Jesus' death that they had just witnessed in Jerusalem. The part that jumps out at me is where the two disciples describe Jesus as a prophet. Had they not fully understood Jesus' words, or were they being a bit cautious with the stranger because of what had happened to Jesus? Then they describe what had happened 3 days later, how the women and later other disciples had visited the tomb and found that Jesus' body had gone. They still did not understand and needed physical evidence. Of course, after Jesus broke the bread, they did recognize him. They did have their physical evidence, and what a difference it made. They immediately ran the 7 miles back to Jerusalem to report back to the disciples. So, what does this mean for us? Well, for me, I think of how the disciples were so devastated by the events of Good Friday and compare that to the times in my life when events have left me feeling totally lost. At those times, I admit that I find praying difficult, especially bringing my own situation before God. And it's at those times that I need the prayers of our church family. And as I feel the burden lift, I feel like the disciples after they had recognized Jesus, reassured, certain of Jesus' presence, and able to carry on. This caring community of St. Giles is a blessing, where we can bear one another's burdens and know that our circumstances will be brought before God. How wonderful is that?